my first attempt to make the breakfast cookies found on page 106 of Oprah's new Food, Health, and Happiness cookbook. I definitely made some unintentional variations, but I still feel like it was a pretty good process. So I wanted to show you what I did. So the first step of the process is to preheat the oven to 350 and to line a baking sheet with a silicone baking mat or some parchment paper. I didn't have either one of those, so I chose to line my sheet with wax paper instead. Not a good idea. That calls for smoking in your oven and filling up your kitchen, but I didn't show you that footage. Also, my other faux pas was that it called for rolled oats. And I used what we had in the pantry, and that was just regular old-fashioned oats. So I do not know how that might have affected it, but that was the change that I made. After spreading out the oats evenly, you are to bake them for 15 to 20 minutes. That's the step that you see here. Here I am chopping 2 large gala apples, which ended up being a very unintended variation. I looked at the recipe after I had this massive amount of apples and realized that it called for 2 small gala apples to be peeled, cored, and roughly chopped. I did roughly chop my apples, and they were large, but I did forget to peel them, so there was peeling. I didn't notice anything that was too bad because it did cook down and soften. However, it did make my cookies very appley. I didn't mind that so much, but my family, they didn't seem to love it. The next step is to be completed while the oats are cooling, and you are to coat a nonstick saute pan with cooking spray and heat the pan over medium heat. Add the chopped apples and cook them for 3 minutes or until they are tender. So there's what the oats look like when they come out of the oven, just nicely browned, and there are the apples on the stove being cooked until they're tender. After the apples have been cooked until tender, you are to set them aside for about 10 minutes to cool. Here I am adding the mashed banana and apple juice together so that I can put them with the cooked apples. Once you have incorporated the bananas and the apple juice, you can put them in together with the cooled apples. Here I am taking out my dehydrated or dried apple slices, and it calls for them to be minced. This was one step that, I don't know, maybe I need to find minced dried apples somewhere, because trying to cut up dried apples was no fun. They really were hard to even pull apart, so I ended up just forgetting the knife and just trying to peel them apart as best I could. I'm sure there's a better way to do this, so if any of you have any tips, please let me know. And from here, I am adding all of the other dry ingredients that it calls for. The recipe specifically says in a separate bowl, combine the toasted oats, walnuts, dried apples, raisins, oat flour, ginger, cinnamon, cloves, mace, nutmeg, baking powder, and salt. So I had all of those ingredients with the exception of walnuts. We had a ton of pecans left from the holidays and baking, so I used pecans instead of walnuts. I was not able to find mace. I went to a couple stores. I have seen it before, but it's not something I regularly use, so I did not use that. I believe I put in some apple pie spice instead of the mace. It also calls for 1/2 cup plus 1 tablespoon of oat flour, 1½ teaspoons of ground ginger, 1/2 teaspoon of ground cloves, 1/2 teaspoon of ground mace, but I substituted apple pie spice. And it also calls for 1/2 teaspoon of ground nutmeg. And here I am putting in 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder and a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. I was loving the way this smelled. Amazing. And here I am incorporating the dried apples and the oats. And finally, I added all of the dry ingredients to the apple juice mixture. Had to stop and take my rings off because it calls for getting your hands a little dirty and working the dough together. Once the dough comes together, you are to cover the bowl with plastic wrap and let the dough rest at room temperature for about 10 minutes. Okay, so if it wasn't already interesting enough, this is where it got really interesting. I was beginning to think, okay, these are really large cookies. Because as I read the recipe, I did read that it was supposed to make 30 cookies at the bottom, but somewhere in the process, I just completely forgot that. And so my ice cream scoop is, I think it's a whole lot bigger than the 3/4 ounce ice cream scoop that this recipe calls out for. But it says portion 12 scoops of cookie dough onto the silicone mat and cover the scoop portions of the dough with plastic wrap and use the bottom of the glass to flatten it until they are 1/2 inch thick. So I'm going through this whole process. I do that with just 12 cookies. So my cookies are massive, like massive. I just didn't realize that they said 12 scoops of cookies, but they just meant to keep doing 12. This is where the recipe was a little, I don't know, unclear maybe, because it does say that it makes 30 cookies, but it says portion 12 scoops of cookie dough onto the silicone mat. And it doesn't say like keep doing that several times. So I got a little confused. Anyway, I ended up making 6 very large cookies. As you can see, my cookies are gigantic. But I didn't think that was so bad because I was thinking, hey, these are breakfast cookies, right? If you're going to have a breakfast cookie, you probably want it to be pretty filling. So I stressed out for a little bit thinking, oh my goodness, these were supposed to be 30 cookies, but there's only 12. This is going to be a ton of points. But actually it ended up being okay. I had to take, I looked everywhere for the actual nutrition information for these Oprah's breakfast cookies. They are not in the back of the book. They are not on a website anywhere. They are nowhere to be found. So there's no nutritional information. There's no there's calories for it if you do the 30 cookies. They're 85 calories a piece. However, there's no fat, sugar, all those things that we need in order to calculate points. So what I ended up having to do was I went to my Weight Watchers app and I put in every single part of the recipe, and I just did recipe builder. And to my surprise, they came out as only 4 points for those gigantic cookies, doing them just 12 cookies from that batch. So I was extremely surprised and very, very happy. So here I am. The oven's at 350 and they are to bake from 12 to 15 minutes or until golden brown. Here's what they look like when I checked them. Nice, some smoke in your face. But they actually really looked good. I was concerned with the size of them and whether or not they were going to be cooked all the way through, but they were. And so here is the final product. They are nowhere near as pretty as the picture in the recipe book, but I am very happy with them. And let me just tell you, they were super fragrant while they were cooking. My goodness, they smelled amazing, and they tasted just as good. Although I know that many things were done not exactly like the recipe called for, honestly, these were delicious. If I had to describe the flavor, I would say that they taste like a really great bowl of oatmeal when you put all of the yummy ingredients in it that you can see. I would definitely make these again. I would probably, if anything, if I had any cons, all those things that I've said are the pros. If there were any cons for me to mention, I would say I would probably cut back on some of the spices just a tiny bit. Like the clove was really powerful. And it may have been my issue. I might not have needed to put the apple spice seasoning in there. So I would omit those two things, maybe cut back on the cloves just a little bit. But overall, I would probably give this a 3.5 out of 5 yums if it was on a scale of 1 to 5 yums. So I hope this helps. I hope you enjoyed this. And of course, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. And we'll see you in the next one.